Hi there. Welcome to another presentation of the Globe Sound Healing Conference. Now we have Stephen Halpern. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, David. Good to be with you and everybody.
Welcome, welcome. Stephen was born hardwired to be highly sensitive to sonic vibrations and has always sought out natural ways to access mindful states of inner peace through sound and music. He was a trumpet player and jazz rock musician, and initially inspired by Greek poets and musicians to seek divine inspiration. He was challenged by two world-class scientists to conduct biofeedback research on the objective effects of his unique approach to mindful composition on body, mind, and spirit rather than relying on subjective responses. Researching with Bentov's proprietary inventions, he learned how to resonate and activate the chakras with corresponding musical keynotes disguised as relaxing music. Mind Mirror Labs in London in 1977 then discovered that listening to his Chakra Suite album evoked a unique level of hemispheric balancing that they had not observed with most other music. This turned out to be an early key to understanding how the right music can assist the body to heal itself and can be like a tuning fork for the brain and human biofield. Stephen's Inner Peace music series of recordings have a 50-year track record of proven positive effects, both in lab settings and in the lives of millions around the world. The music evokes high coherence brainwave balancing and is a major key to sound healing. Your human instrument is genetically pre-programmed to naturally shift into higher coherence consciousness and harmonizing body, mind, and spirit. It's not a matter of belief. Observed benefits, including healing music in your playlists, include enhancing and deepening and accelerating access to meditative states, massage, enhanced focus and concentration, psychedelic assisted therapy, ADHD, optimum well-being, and better sleep.
Wow, that's quite an introduction. I'm going, that's really accurate. And then as I'm reading it, I go, oh yeah, that's what you asked me to write up, which I didn't realize would be the intro now. But that's my whole workshop, folks. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So you kind of been doing this since the beginning of time, huh?
Pretty much, pretty much. And in the early days, to talk about sound healing, I got a lot of eye rolls, and there was no interest certainly in the music industry. And outside of that, this was even starting before the holistic medicine fields began to open up, and holistic health and wellness, what I wrote my book on called Sound Health. At that point, people were not interested, didn't consider it a real thing. And over the years, it's proven that it is a real thing. And more people like yourself have come in. And I want to acknowledge you for having probably the premier organization and institute, at least in the United States, in dealing with all the topics that you deal with sound and sound healing. So, right on. It's I know there's a whole lot of logistical aspects involved in that most people probably have no idea. And I don't even have an idea of all the battles you've had. I know the battles I've had, and I'll speak to some of them. But the reality is this field is for real. And it's not a recent development. And from day one, it was a threat to the medical establishment. One of the key words that you use in the intro is that our human instrument, our body, mind, and spirit, is a self-healing organism, a self-healing instrument. And if you can heal yourself using various aspects in the sound domain, or include that in the various modalities that you are using for yourself, well, the pharmaceutical industry told me in 1978 that they consider that to be competition. And, the fact that if you have a stress headache, you could take an aspirin or you could listen to some of the recordings that are now available. Uh, they felt that it was competition, and they were right. But back then, those of us who had albums that were selling 10,000 a year, and they were selling 10 billion aspirin a year, but they still saw that the future was not in little pills, but it was in vibrations and frequencies. And that goes back to what the ancients knew. And over the decades, I've been able to visit some of the places where ancient healing using sound and entrainment was taking place inside the Great Pyramid, in Stonehenge, and other places. They just didn't talk about it in the same way. But that's what got me interested in it. And when I say I was hardwired, I came in interested. I was seeking out things that I didn't know were getting me into an altered states of consciousness. But because we didn't have that vocabulary in the 1960s, or even as younger than that, in grade school and high school, I would be getting entrained by the flickering lights on a lake as the water would glisten on the little ripples. And years later, would find out that my brain was being photostrobed to get into a particularly balanced meditative state. So that was natural, and it was free. And natural and free have always been two very important words for me, particularly when I had very little money, throughout college and my early career, living on the skinny, as we say in the back in the jazz world, in the music world. So things that were inexpensive that I could do for myself and that worked were always high on my list of I need to know more about that. And then, as you mentioned, and I'll get into this, I did get challenged by Dr. Stanley Krippner and Dr. John Lilly, two of the leading research scientists in brain-mind activity back in the late 60s and early 70s. They said, well, we see people meditating, we can observe their subjective responses. When you ask them, how does this music make you feel? They would say, it makes me feel so relaxed. I feel like I'm at home. I'm, back in heaven. We didn't have the word mindfulness at that point, but they said, this is all well and good, but if you want to be taken seriously, you need to be doing scientific research. And I said, I'm a musician. What are you talking about research? I don't have any research apparatus. And as I'll get into in my talk, things started coming into my life and doorways opened, and suddenly I had access to some world-class leading edge equipment that I could use for free because I was in a graduate program and conducted research, which I thought was going to be a one and done, a couple of weekends in March of 1973, went through 100 research subjects, did my master's degree write-up and thesis, and thought that was going to be it. Never dreaming that a few years later, when I started sharing my music with the world, the media would say, how do we know this works? Yes, it's pretty music, but there's lots of pretty music out there. I said, it's not music, and it's actually more balancing than the best of your classical music, which, of course, pissed off the music therapists and a lot of the people in media. Said, well, we like Mozart. We don't care if it's not as healing as your music. We like it, so we're not going to report on you. So, those are some of my early battles. But going back to my research, it was, I have this scientific data that I could show people. And that was what got me on national TV and other places and got me a platform to be speaking at all the original mind, body, spirit conferences that no other musician or sound healer was speaking at, because there weren't any other sound healers out in the public at that point. So, the mid 70s up to the early 80s, it was kind of an open field for me. So that's what we're doing today. Since most of the other podcasts are going to be talking more about some of the other technologies, I thought I would also involve and include some coaching and some ideas and hints for the musicians who are watching this, who may want to know some inner secrets or some of my secrets, or what could they do on their own. And I'll talk about that in terms of musicianship, in terms of consciousness, in terms of music being a carryaway for consciousness, in terms of stress, not just of the music, but of the performer, and how that can change and modify and undermine the notes that are being played. So
Cool. I'll throw in
that's
the
what we're doing.
recording side there too if we need to.
What's that?
I'll throw in the recording side if we need to as well.
Right.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, before we get started, we got the big question. If you had all the money in the world, what would you do to help people on the planet?
That's almost an impossible question to answer. I would like everybody to understand that we're all connected and we're all one. And then all these different names and all the fighting that's going on because people have different names for God and their religion are all pretty much talking about the same basic energy. And that if we were able to go to a higher level and look at all of this, we see that we're all basically talking about the same thing. And it's not a matter of my God is better than your God, but if we could all agree with that, it would be much easier. The other thing that researchers like Dr. Brian Weiss, Dr. Walter Simcu, and the whole field of reincarnation therapy and reincarnation research, if people understood that in a prior existence, they might have been a Muslim or a different race that they are discriminating against now, they would kind of ease up a little bit and see that, oh, I'm actually just fighting myself. It would really open up and take some of the bitterness out. But of course, what we see going on in the world now is a whole lot of people who have a vested interest in keeping people divided. And I don't know that there's all the money in the world that, well, they have all the money in the world right now, and they're using it to keep us separated. And, that's a whole other topic in terms of who's pulling the strings. And researchers like David Icke and other people are talking about, connecting the dots and how long this has been going on, which is astounding. And well, just even one final thing that people can check on their own. There's a program that's one of the most popular cable programs called The Curse of Oak Island, which traces the Knights Templar coming from Europe into the New World and finding this little island near Nova Scotia and hiding lots of gold and probably some religious treasures that secret societies knew about this. Now, right now, they're using all these huge construction devices and machines to dig what some people did by hand 500, 1,000, even 2,000 years ago. They're finding things that go back to the Roman days. And they knew things that we don't know now. And that's beyond what the program is dealing with. But my little connection to that, in addition to being interested in, is there was a map written and drawn in 1347 that shows this secret little island near Nova Scotia that my dear departed aunt, Zena Halpern, was given because she was researching this. Now, that was more than 100 years before Columbus was here. So this area was known to the Portuguese, to the Spanish. Columbus probably knew about this place. And all that has been hidden. So a lot of the material that we're dealing with sound goes back to what the ancients knew about and built into the Great Pyramid, into many other structures. There's some research going on with archaeology and mystical archaeology that there's resonances built into Stonehenge and the temples in Malta and the caves beneath the ground that if you're particularly a male with a low voice, you can activate by chanting certain frequencies that are naturally fortified and amplified in those caves and in those temples. Well, that was before the FDA made it illegal to talk about brainwave entrainment as a health benefit. They were not doing it as a health benefit. It was a ceremonial benefit. It was a spiritual benefit. And they knew about this. And now we're just rediscovering so much of what was known ages ago. And it's an exciting field to be in.
Nice. Okay. Well, go ahead and blast off.
All right.
I can't wait.
All right, everyone. So I'll be covering a lot of areas. If you have questions, you can get in touch with me either through David Gibson or my website by email. Works better for me than Facebook or any other of the social media aspects. That's info@innerpeacemusic.com. So let me begin with a couple main principles that I've been speaking about in public since the early 1970s. And that is, number one, asking you, what do you consider sound healing? What does sound healing mean to you? Well, what it means to me certainly is using particular sounds and music and tones to activate and resonate and elevate the vibrational frequencies of our human instrument, our body, mind, and spirit. I had the honor and privilege through the research that I was involved in 1973 in working with one of the leading scientists who invented machines to measure the frequency of chakras and to measure what happens in our body when you shift from normal waking consciousness in terms of brain waves and how that affects how our internal energy flow and literally our blood flow changes. So that might be a good way to begin. I'll be sharing some suggestions that most music teachers don't know about and thus can't share with you. But these are some things that my teachers shared with me and things that I've developed on my own in terms of developing my own sources of inspiration and my own abilities to get into the state where the music that I play has the benefits that I seek to share with my audiences. So the couple of main concepts that we will be dealing with, I'm sure many of you know about them from the other studies or from the other presenters, concepts of resonance, of entrainment, of intention, and tone quality. Back in high school, in music class, we learned about rhythm and melody and timbre, tone quality, and chord progressions. And what I'll show you early on is why those actually are encoded with basically stress-inducing aspects that are designed to keep you out of a deeply meditative state in terms of how your brainwave balance of the hemispheres of the brain are affected. So let me just begin right now with a little bit of melodic imperialism. I'd like you to focus on your breathing, become aware of what you're feeling in your chest and in your head in the temple area as I sing this well-known little ascending series of tones. This is the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And what are you noticing right now? Most people notice that they are holding the final do and waiting for the resolution of that pattern of tones. We've been culturally conditioned to know what to expect, which is all well and good for most music, for entertainment purposes or psychological or whatever. But when it comes to balancing our own neuroanatomy, when it comes to balancing the hemispheres of the brain, here's what happens. When your brain hears this familiar pattern, it naturally shifts into an unconscious analysis, an intellectual analysis, which activates more of the left brain, the analytical thinking mode, than the right brain. And what this means is it unbalances your brain immediately. Not that that's always a bad thing. It could be a lot of fun. But when you ask the body, as Itzhak Bentov asked in his book, the classic book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum, if you ask the body, how would you like to be resonated? How would you like to be vibrationally caressed? Would you like to be struck like with a sledgehammer sound? Would you like to be gently caressed into balance? Body would say, I'd like to be caressed into balance. Well, that's not what Western classical music is about. It's not what the entertainment industry is about. Not to say that that's bad, it's just different. What we're dealing with here now are factors beyond that are not recognized by most people. In fact, when I started out, the whole concept of the field of stress was not known to the public. Even the medical field really didn't catch on to the work until Dr. Hans Selye in the stress research that he did at the University of McGill up in Montreal really went out to the public. And then it was in Psychology Today and major magazines. And suddenly people started understanding the power of stress in our lives, stress meaning dis-ease. And then the medical research comes out and says, we believe, our evidence is that 85% of diseases are caused by or amplified by dis-ease, stress. Now, for 40 years after that, that was always a major part of my workshops. Just last year, the FDA said to claim that any music can reduce stress is making a health claim. Now, people have been using music to reduce stress for thousands of years, long before the FDA. But I'll just say it right now, in case the FDA is listening. We're not making any claims about reducing stress with music, but we will be reporting on research and what people have found around the world that seems to hold, just like David's question, if we had all the money in the world, it seems that most people's bodies react the same. Maybe not to the sequence of tones that we have in the Western European tonal system, the 7-member system, and much of the world works with a 5-scale tonal system, which doesn't have the same directionality that we have in the West. That was what John Coltrane and many of the other jazz musicians, Miles Davis, in the late 60s started working with a 5-note pentatonic scale and modalities that didn't have the same directionality and predictive aspect of classical music or jazz up to that point. It was more open-ended. Scholars and researchers and composers like Dane Rudhyar, the famous astrologer, said that we call this creative music rather than procreative music that locks you into a system. Nowadays, we have the word mindfulness. The scalus interruptus that I demonstrated just before, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, interruptus, do, is opposite to the way that we would be, and we are when we're dealing with tuning forks, Tibetan bowls, crystal bowls. And one of the reasons why these sound tools and sound instruments are so widespread now is because very quickly when you hear those sounds, your left brain gives up trying to analyze where the music will go in the future. Mindfulness is all about being present in the here and now. That's the HEAR as well as the HERE now. Being present in the present moment, being at peace in the present moment. Well, being a type, we used to call this being a type A, fast-moving individual. When MTV had its early taglines, I want my MTV and I want it now. When I found out from some medical tests that my stress level was way off the chart, but it was natural and normal for me, the doctor said, that may be normal for you, but if you don't learn to manage your stress, you're going to have a lot of diseases and you're going to have some problems later on. And they're also expensive. That got my attention also. So it was a confluence of the breakthroughs of Dr. Hans Selye, the holistic health field, and the research that I wound up doing officially in 1973 that showed the stress-reducing aspects of the music that we used in the research was so much more powerful and effective than the most relaxing music that the music therapy field had, which was I was doing solo keyboard. We went up against Liszt, Liebestraum number 3, solo keyboard, and blew it out of the water. It was such a astounding, easy to identify change in state that one of the other researchers, who indeed was already nationally famous because he worked on The Secret Life of Plants, Randall Fonts, said, this is no longer just your graduate research program. This is your life. You need to tell the world about that. And I said, how do I do that? I don't have money to, start a record company. I don't know anything about business. Well, over the years, I had to learn. And that's part of what brings me here today. I had to learn how to speak to the media because when I brought my first album to them, they said the same thing that the executives at Columbia Special Products or Warner Brothers or CBS said, where's the beat? Where's the melody? And I said, well, it's working on a more subtle level. There's a beat, but it's not a heartbeat. It's a brainwave beat. And they didn't understand that. They didn't know what a brainwave was. And to this day, a lot of people still really don't know what brainwaves are. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. I'm assuming we have some rookies, some new folks here who may need a little backup and introduction to some of the brainwave states, so we'll cover that quickly. But the bottom line is that I became the first member of my audience, and I would not be here today if the music that I started recording wasn't the music that I was able to listen to that helped me balance and helped take me into more healthful states of being, and I didn't turn into a stressed out musician. It meant a total change in my lifestyle from being involved in the jazz rock world as a trumpet player, as a guitar player. Little aside, one of the other instructors here, the first band I wound up joining in California when I came out in late 1969, joined the band in early 1970, was with Randy Masters when he was playing trumpet and had a Fender Rhodes piano, which I didn't have the money to buy, but I was lusting and jonesing to play the piano, and he wanted to play more trumpet. So I joined the band. He got to play more trumpet. I got to play his piano. And then shortly thereafter, I was able to buy my own piano. And that's when my life changed. When I was able to self-orchestrate on the spectrum of consciousness, when I could play sitting at my Fender Rhodes suitcase model, so the speakers had built-in phase relationships and built-in vibrato. We didn't have the wording at the time, but I was entraining my brain to a deep alpha and a deep theta state without knowing that that's what I was doing. What I knew is that it felt great. It was a natural high. And when I started performing in public, small, little concerts, people said, where can we get music like that? And there was nowhere to get music like that. And that was part of my impetus to find a studio to do my first recording. And that was 100 albums ago. And that's what I've been continuing to work on. So we've dealt with a little bit of the concept of entrainment we've dealt with a little bit of the mental aspect of the scales and how we are unconsciously controlled, manipulated by the music we hear. Whether you're paying attention to it or not is another important principle. But two other keys here, we have the concept of entrainment and resonance. Let's deal with entrainment for a moment. Feel your heartbeat right now. As I begin to clap out a very simple rhythm, notice what happens when I speed it up. You may notice through the frequency following effect that your heartbeat is speeding up, and then I can slow it back down. I demonstrated this in 1986 in February at the National Convention of Holistic Nurses, and half of them fell out of their chairs, and they realized when they were taking the pulse of a patient, and if there was music playing through the PA system, they were not taking the pulse of the patient. They were taking the pulse of the patient who was listening to music and not even consciously listening, but their heart beat and their pulse was being manipulated by the music in the background. And this changed a lot of the procedures that nurses would take when they were taking pulse readings. Now, that is rhythm entrainment on a macro level. This is beats per minute. And the traditional wisdom says beats per minute are about 60 beats per minute is the realm of relaxation below, but not much above that, because then you move into where it's too fast for the heart. Now, the other kind of entrainment is more subtle. It's brainwave entrainment. It's where the electrical pulsations in our brain that were given different names when they were discovered, like the beta between 13 and 39 cycles per second, and alpha between 8 and 12 cycles per second, and theta between 4 and 7 cycles per second, and delta in the sleep area between 1 and 3 cycles per second. You'll find some books that have slightly different variations, but those are the demarcations. And in my own research, I was very interested in knowing if I could feel the difference between meditating at 8 cycles per second or 12 cycles per second or 4 cycles per second or any of the frequencies in between. So I started doing research, and what I found is that, yes, I could feel the difference, and at certain frequencies, my own creativity would just open up and flow so much more freely that at a certain point, I use that at the beginning of most all of my recordings since 1980 to get myself into the proper state of higher creativity and higher balance and higher coherence. So you will have a chance to find soundtracks that work for you. I've published some of my own. They're called Deep Alpha, Deep Theta, and the other versions of them that had more bamboo flute. But why don't we go right now to the first sample from Deep Theta. All you need to do is be quiet. We're going to go to a little bit of a video that has the soundtrack with the entrainment in there, and this will last about a minute. See you after the music ends. All you need to do is listen. All right. Now, from that small sample, you might have been able to feel a little of the change your in your being, in how your body, mind, and spirit is feeling. Maybe there's a little more resonance around your head or a little more of a tinkling. What happens, and again, we learned this, I learned this, everyone else learned it from Itzhak Bentov, is that when you start getting relaxed, your body says, thank you. This is my natural state. I want more of this. And naturally changes the way the blood is ejected from the heart up into the skull, into the brain, that begins to pulsate the brain in a periodic fashion rather than in the normal random fashion. And when that happens, and this is a key to how my understanding of how a lot of sound healing works, and I believe it's true with tuning forks and a lot of the other sound tools, is that when your brain shifts frequencies, when you can't analyze, it goes into more of a neutral state. And when your brain is now being rhythmically pulsed by the blood coming out of your heart, that sets up an associated electromagnetic field around your head, which is created by what's called the piezoelectric effect when you vibrate an electrical organism like the brain. And that electromagnetic field around your head naturally is tuned to 8 cycles per second. Why that's important is because that is the fundamental harmonic frequency of the Earth itself. Give or take a few frequencies, so between 7.83 and 8.1, the great scientist Dr. Andrei Puharich, who I also had a chance to research with, said close enough is good enough because the Earth itself vacillates, but the basic fundamental frequency of the Earth's Schumann resonance is 8 cycles per second. And that is why we naturally like being near a lake or by out in nature or by a relaxing lagoon by the ocean. Nature is healing. Nature entrains us. Naturally, the FDA can't bust nature, and people have been tuning into nature for thousands of years for that reason, without knowing that that's part of what's happening. Well, when we can fine tune the frequency at which we're listening to music or playing music, we have a lot more control over the effect that we will have on the listener. One of the other principles I learned early on from appearing and attending conferences on mind, body, medicine, and holistic health and spirituality was the great scientist, Dr. William Tiller, who was at that point the chairman of material science at Stanford. And he pointed out the concept of, that engineers will understand, using something as a carrier wave, using a radio frequency or, well, I understood that and said, well, I am using music as a carrier wave for consciousness. And he said, yes, that's exactly what you're doing. So that's why the consciousness of the performer, whose desire and intention is to create healing music and to share that with the audience, needs to be in a balanced state, him or herself. And if not, even if all the notes are correct, the energy is not. And who else understood that? With Dr. John Diamond in his book, Your Body Doesn't Lie, and Timothy Galway, who wrote the bestsellers, The Inner Game of Golf, The Inner Game of Tennis, and was writing The Inner Game of Music when I was invited to be a guest a faculty member at one of his workshops. And he asked the room of 35 musicians who were vocalists, violinists, keyboardists, soloists in the orchestra, etc. What is your dominant awareness when you're on stage or when you're in the recording studio? What is your psychological state? What is your physiological state? 34 out of 35 people said, we're uptight. we're concerned that we're going to make a mistake and somebody's going to mark us, critique us badly because we made a mistake. And one guy in the back of the room says, having fun, sharing love with my audience. And everyone turned around to look at me. I was the only one who was not a classical musician. I was a jazz improvisation trained musician and a composer. I also had the advantage of, since I wasn't playing a piece by Mozart or by Bach that everybody knew all the notes, if I made a mistake, nobody would know. And also, they were in the state, not in the left brain analytical mode, but they're in the holistic mode, that they're going with the feel and not the individual tiny little details. So that was a major breakthrough in understanding for me. So we've dealt with entrainment, but let's also look a little bit of resonance, because it's not just a frequency, but the tonal aspect of the tones. There are a lot, even pianos. A lot of them have the same notes, the same basic frequency, but the tonal color of the instruments are different. Same thing with synthesizers and with violins and something. That's why a Stradivarius costs how many thousands of dollars, because they produce a warmer tone. When I was able to first heard what became known as the Fender Rhodes electric piano in my head before I had ever seen one, it just took me out of my body, out into space, into the quantum field. And the first time I heard that instrument in person was when I was sitting in at a jazz club that was with the band that was opening for Herbie Hancock. And he had the instrument before I met Randy Masters. And I had an out-of-body experience from the first notes that he played. And he was not impressed with the instrument on that level, because he wants the faster action of a grand piano. Meanwhile, I'm picking myself up the floor because I was out in space. So the instrumental tone of a Rhodes electric piano is a function of the fact that the instrument is basically a series of tuning forks played by a keyboard. So the concept of tonal color, timbre, is very important. And in terms of resonance, you could easily verify for yourself that low sounds resonated in the lower part of the torso, lower part of the body, mid-range sounds in the middle part of the body, and high sounds in the head area. No music teacher ever told me that, but it was one of the reasons I was attracted to playing bass, because, again, I could self-orchestrate and self-stimulate my body with the tones of the instrument. With the trumpet, it was more coming from the diaphragm, and with the piano, I could do the low notes and high notes, and it was a full body massage, a sonic massage, an internal experience that also manifested on the external aspect. Another key point we talk about is intention. Again, Dr. John Diamond would do muscle testing, where he would see if the muscles of the body would stay firm or get weakened, which was a function of stressful music. And he demonstrated, the first one to really put this on the map, that if you are playing a classical piece or any piece of your own invention, but particularly playing, let's say, a piece by Mozart or Beethoven, and you are uptight when you're playing it, even if all the notes are right, it'll still have a weakening effect on the listener. And Dr. Diamond tested 20,000 recordings. He worked at a hospital in Australia, so they had a budget, and he could buy 20,000 classical recordings. And some of the people and the musicians that he said were very stressful and weakening were some of the most famous classical pianists. And I said, well, Dr. Diamond, who are these people so we shouldn't listen to them? He says, I'm not going to tell you. I bought 20,000 records. You'll have to buy your own records and figure that out. But at a certain point, you could feel it. I could feel. I learned how to feel it in my body. And so even if I'm listening to some streaming music now, and one of the reasons why I don't do that a lot because there might be a great piece of music, and then right after that, one that I could just feel is shredding my energy field, is stressing me out. I could feel my heartbeat skipping some beats. I know that that musician was stressed when they were recording. It could be because they were on a tight budget. It could be because they didn't know any better and they were afraid of making mistakes. A lot of reasons. But I learned early on that if I was stressed in the studio, I couldn't produce and record music that had the healing capacity. It was about that time, early in my career, in late 1970s, 1977, that I was invited to speak at the Edgar Cayce Foundation in Virginia Beach. And I was going through their library, and I found a book that they didn't even know they had. And in that book, Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who was talking about and channeling the healing priest musicians of ancient Egypt, was talking about and wrote something called the Musician's Prayer. And I invite everyone to seek that out. The basic aspect was the musician's intention, Lord, in prayer, Lord, let me bring through music that serves the highest and best in my listener and provide that which is needed to bring them into balance. Well, this quotation, this prayer, was starting on this part of the page, and I had to turn over the page, and I was continuing to speak the prayer before I had turned over the page. So I knew that, just getting a chill as I say that, I knew that prayer somehow internally, past life memory, or just tuning into that radio station in the cosmos. And when I brought this to their attention at the Cayce Foundation, they said, well, we don't know about that. And we went to look for the book, and we couldn't find it. Ultimately, we did find it, and I wasn't imagining it, and it does exist. But I brought that in when I wrote my first book, which you can find sometimes online, Tuning the Human Instrument, and my other book, major book published by Halpern, Sound Health. There's a lot of information in there. There's a lot of information that my editors made me take out, but a great bibliography in both books that if you're interested in knowing more about this field, you will want to check into those books, find them. Sound Health is now up on academia.com. Somebody put it up there for free. So the fact that you can't find your own copy has now been taken care of in the digital domain. Okay, so those are some key points. Now, if you are playing an instrument, there are some instruments that naturally have more soothing tones than others. And without getting into different brands, in general, I mentioned the Fender Rhodes electric piano. When I was searching to buy my first piano, I was told, in fact, David knows the studio that I was working at because he was there too at the point, the Music Annex. And I asked the owner, you have a great piano here. How do I get one like that? He says, well, you can't just trust that it's Yamaha or a C3 or C7 Conservatory Grand. You have to play every piano in the store. In fact, I played every piano in the Bay Area at every music store, every piano store, and found the one that I bought that felt the best and had the warmest tone. And that's what I've had at home ever since then. Interestingly, in Palo Alto, as I was testing out pianos, a woman and her daughter were watching me and said, wow, you play really well. And I said, thank you very much. Can you tell me if this piano that we're looking at is a good one? You seem like you know what you're doing. And I gave her some feedback and said, well, this one, the action is not good. Your daughter's going to have a hard time playing it. You can't do the glissandos that I do. And she said, thank you very much. My name is Mrs. I forgot his first name, Mrs. Walsh, and the coach of the 49ers. And here's something, I'll get you tickets to the next home football game against the New York Giants. So she appreciated this, and it's amazing what can happen sometimes when you're just trying out pianos. But when you're finding your own instrument, whether it's a trumpet, a guitar, or something else, it's really important. Some of my teachers told me when I was playing trumpet and guitar, you want to be, if you're watching TV, you want to be holding your instrument so that it becomes part of your nervous system, an extension of your nervous system. And when I was still playing those instruments professionally, that was very, very helpful to me. Now, what was also very helpful to me is to know that there is a tradition that goes back to the ancient Greeks, as David mentioned in the introduction, and also in China and in Egypt and other cultures, where the musicians or the artist or the poet would tune in to his or her muse. Well, that was a concept that I thought was just a metaphor, but it turns out there is a real vibrational reality to that. And when I learned about that in my freshman year from some of these master poets and master musicians, I said, well, I want to tune into my muse and set my intention, started praying to tune into my muse, not knowing what would be the result. But I did have an experience early on playing with some high energy jazz musicians by basically the first month up at college, University of Buffalo, where I started playing trumpet and playing all the rehearsed licks and melodies and fancy notes to go along with chords that I had been practicing for years. And then all of a sudden, and this is something that some of you, most of you, I bet, have never experienced, the music started playing itself. And on a trumpet, you have to have your embouchure right, you have to have the diaphragm support, and suddenly everything was effortless. I couldn't even feel the trumpet on my lips. I was playing faster, higher, and better than I ever had before. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew something magical had just happened. And that was my first breakthrough into starting to channel music from a higher coherence, a higher vibrational level. It turns out that the musicians I was sitting in with, that was part of their gig. And the master musician in Buffalo at that point, Jack Clark, invited me to be part of the smaller community of poets and musicians who included tuning into their muse as part of their training, part of the instruction as an artist. And I continued with that and didn't have major breakthroughs for the next 4 years until I came out to California and was sitting in meditation in a sacred redwood grove, which I had never seen living in New York, and had the deepest meditation, a spontaneous meditation in which I started hearing music that I had never heard before. And it sounded like the music that I wound up playing on Chakra Suite. And it had that tone, which was an instrument that I had never heard before. The closest thing available was the xylophone, called the vibraphone, not the not the marimba, not the percussive one, but the one that basically has metal bars that you would strike with a soft mallet, and that was similar to the tone of again. The tone was what drew me, and when I started hearing this sound, I was searching for the instrument that would do that. Fairly shortly thereafter, I met that instrument, but didn't have the money to buy it right away, and what that sounds like, that also relates to one of the other topics that comes up in this summit, is the next video that we'll hear that compares music of Chakra Suite Keynote 1, which goes to the first chakra from the Keynote C, played first at 440 hertz, 440 cycles per second, which is standard orchestra tuning, and then tuned to 432 hertz. There's a lot of information and misinformation and opinions masquerading as facts on the internet about the benefits of various aspects of this and who invented this and is this and who designed the 440, who chose 440 instead of the 432s. In Mozart's day, the keynote of C was down around 256 cycles per second, as opposed and even lower, whereas A was not 440, it was A428 in Mozart's day. Most people don't know that. So 432 is somewhere between higher than Mozart, lower than concert pitch. One of the reasons concert pitch moved higher was because you could, before microphones were invented, you could produce a louder sound when the strings were tighter. But having said that, let's see if you can feel the difference between the same notes that I played on my Rhodes piano, which is tuned to 440, are played and what you hear on 432. Now, I will give you a caveat. In researching this, whichever you feel first will change how you hear the second sample. It's not as easy as having a palate cleanser when you're drinking wine and tasting wine. But you could go back and forth on your leisure afterwards. These samples are up on my website. They're up on my YouTube channel. And everything that we don't get a chance to look at all the videos today, you can check out on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Stephen Halpern Music, and check out the playlist, and you'll see a lot of these. So, having said that, here are the samples of the same music played in the two different frequency ranges. hopefully you got a sense of the tones are a little different. Obviously, the music at 432 hertz sounds a little lower, but the tone should be about the same. It's the same instrument, it's the same notes. Now, the question comes up, is one naturally more healing than another? That's an open question. The next video that we're going to share with you relates to my recording of chanting Om, and it's from the album called Om Zone 432 Hertz. I first recorded my first Om Zone album at 440 hertz. And as there was more interest in 428, which was one of the pyramid frequencies, and 432, I wanted to record at 432 hertz as well. Now, it's basically impossible to retune a Rhodes electric piano. You can tune a synthesizer very easily to 432 rather than 440 hertz. You can't easily retune a grand piano. It will explode, says my piano teacher, my piano tuner. But with the voice, you could easily take a crystal bowl or a tuning fork and sing along with that frequency. So that's what I did. Now, what I will tell you is that when I would play music, when I tuned my synthesizer keyboards to 432 hertz, I didn't notice a huge difference in creativity or any other thing that I could define verbally right now. But when I started to chant at 432 hertz, something magical happened. And you'll hear in this little sample first Sylvia Nakache, who recorded first, and I was so inspired by what she was doing, I told my engineer, stop the tape, let me go up and give me a microphone, and without warming up, let me just improvise as a demo track. Well, I got up, and I'll let you hear what happened. It was the best I ever improvised and chanted, the most in tune I ever sang, and the most my voice opened up. And it didn't do that at 440. So that to me was a major tell, a major reason that at least for chanting, there's some backup for coming at it for 432. So let's listen to the video that will look like this on the album. One other sample I'd like to share with you right now is the music from Deep Alpha. And I want to share this because the level of creativity was so high, it even managed to entrain and resonate with a lot of the Grammy voters And that's one of the reasons Deep Alpha was nominated for Best New Age Album of the Year in 2012. What you will hear is my keyboard arrangement in the background. You'll hear my Rhodes electric piano, and then you will hear the world's best oboe player, in my opinion, playing one of the most classic melodic motifs I've ever heard. My engineer and I were getting chills in the studio. Paul McCandless improvises. He tuned in to my sound arrangement, which had the deep alpha 8 hertz embedded into the music. And this is what he played. Okay, so as our time draws to a close, some of the key principles that I've mentioned is if you are wanting to, or if you are entering an interest in the field of sound healing, number one, know your history. Understand that this is a tradition that goes back thousands of years. You may want to read books like uh, Music and the Secret Influence Through the Ages by Cyril Scott, a great book by the Sufi master Hazrat Inayat Khan, the mysticism of music, the music of life, very inspirational. The liner notes of John Coltrane's classic album A Love Supreme, the research on plants and consciousness, the secret life of plants. We were partnering with Dr. Cleve Baxter, who did the research. With my research team, they actually worked with him. So again, I was tuned into some of the leading researchers in 1973, which was life-changing for me. Another great historical book that nobody knows about now, Through Music to the Self by Peter Michael Hamel. Wonderful books. And the introduction to A Listener's Guide to New Age Music by P.J. Borosic. I wrote the introduction. It is arguably the best introduction in history of New Age music and why New Age music was such a breakthrough in consciousness in the world of music and why the music industry tried to outlaw it and keep it hidden, wouldn't allow it into the Grammys for many years. And then finally we got into the Grammys for a little while and now we're being kicked back out again, but that's another whole workshop. The whole concept of psychoacoustic music and sound. The first person to use the word psychoacoustics on national television was me when I was on the late show, the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder back in 1979. The first time anyone played music to tune the chakras was when I did it on the Tom Snyder Show in 1979, live over to a national audience. And that was before my book, Sound Health, came out, when I would go around the country and do a media tour and appear on TV and radio in all the major cities. And that really helped get the information out there. But as you research, go back and know your history. As musicians, we were always taught to honor our ancestors, to know the tradition of jazz, and even if you don't go back to Dixieland and swing, to understand that it changed in the 60s when more musicians were getting involved in spirituality and not drugs, and that they were also reading Hazrat Inayat Khan, the music of Alexander Scriabin, the Russian mystic composer. And it was that really inspired me to go deeper into my own readings and started taking classes on psychic development and again praying to hear music in dreams, in meditations. And my career owes a lot to the assistance that I've gotten and the guidance and the inspiration that I've received. It's why on many of my albums I talk about my co-composers, my invisible, multidimensional co-composers. You can't see them, but they are present. And in my memoir, which I'm finishing up this year, I will share more of the specific stories that in many cases were witnessed by other people as well. So I see now by the hands on the digital clock that our time is just about over. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your feedback and enjoy the rest of the amazing program that David Gibson has put together for you.
Oh, I've got some questions and comments here.
Okay.
Cool. Excellent. Oh my God. So, this concept that the intention is the whole deal. It's interesting because it's not just music. It's in whatever you're doing.
True.
I mean, whether it's your work or if you're doing a treatment on someone, I mean,
Absolutely.
the energy you bring to it is the whole deal, right?
Right. A lot of the alternative therapists, and the healers know that, but a lot of them don't. And certainly
Hmm.
the mainstream doctors don't.
Yeah. Well, I've been to sound baths where it's kind of cool. And then I've been to other sound baths where the ceiling opens up and purple light pours into your heart and people are in tears, right? And it's like I think, okay, what are they doing? What do you do to get in the zone before you play? Right? What do
Yeah.
you do?
What do I do?
Yeah.
Well, I do all the things that I just mentioned. I pray, I invoke, I say that prayer, silently before I go on stage. I take some deep breaths, and when I've done, I mean, the last couple of concerts I've done uh, at the Unity Church, but even when I was out on the road, where there's Unity Church of Dallas, there's usually some place where I could just get a couple minutes of silence and just get silent and get into that quiet place. And I usually don't know what I'm going to do with my first song. And as I get into it, and as some of my little videos that I recorded at Unity and Marin, as I'm playing my Eastern Peace song, in the middle of that song, the piano suddenly went from being like a baby grand to a 7 foot grand, and I felt a whoosh. The harmonics were deeper. It was just so much richer. And as I'm playing, I said, "Wow, did everybody just feel that change?" And they did. So it wasn't just me. So those are some of the things I do. So you can't always count on, you know, assistance from other levels, but I'm told that whenever I play, and some of these concerts I've done over the years, some of these psychics in the audience have drawn pictures of the angels they see or the beings they see around me. I don't see them, but I've learned to trust that they are there. And even when I'm not feeling totally creative, the piano sucks, it has missing notes, and it's a really tough thing to play. There's still the intention is still to be of service. So that's my main thing. And it was less about it, and I would say this a lot of times. It's not just about my a performance, it's about an experience
Mhm.
in the subtle dimensions of sound. So that's what I do.
Nice. One thing I'd like to add to the prayer that we do here is it's for the highest and good of both of us.
Yeah. And the planet.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
excellent, excellent. So one thing that I always point out about the 432 thing, there's a million songs in 432 that I would never listen to on YouTube,
Yes. Oh,
right?
yes.
Right.
Oh,
And I have seen God at 440, right? It's the energy and the music is light years more important.
well, that's always what I said. I was running out of time because I usually say something just like that. Bad music at 432 versus good music at 440. It's not a question. Right. And there's a lot of bad music. Well, yes, well, you just said it. I was trying to stay positive and looking at the clock and going, okay, I can't really go into it, but
Come too far.
absolutely.
Cool. It's interesting. There's one thing I've learned as well, and that is smooth flow. If a lot of pop music and a lot of even dance music has abrupt changes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And when you do a smooth flow, your biosystem goes with it more, which
Yes.
means when you get mellow, people really go with you and get way more mellow
Right.
when you create dynamics that change uh, smoothly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's always what I did. My first album uh was all that way. The first two songs on side two, but then I ran out of material and I said, well, I paid Porter already in advance. I got, 2 more hours left. So I called my drummer friend who lived nearby and said, "Come on down to the studio." That was when he was first in San Jose, in his home garage studio, and we jammed. And I don't know if you've ever heard. It's on my website. It's called Something for Everybody. I have a YouTube, and it was a jazz rock. Starts with trumpet. I have Otis playing drums, and then it ends with a chill out area. But people would write me and says from the first thing, "We love all your album except that last song on side two. Get rid of it because it interrupts our flow. If we're getting massage or if we're making love, we don't want to hear that." So I got rid of it. A couple of years ago, a hip hop DJ on his podcast calls me up and says, "Why do you take that on?" And on discography and some websites, it said Halpern was, he took off the only good song on his first album. And I will speak to that in my book because it was jazz rock and it was some good stuff. And I got some gigs out of it. But as you say, it was abrupt. To this day, and the other thing was, what I had no idea was that hip hop artists and musicians in Europe, all around the world, have sampled that track, particularly some of the drum breaks and some of the grooves. No one ever wrote me for permission. No one ever even thanked me. Got no royalties. But this DJ, who told me about it, says, "Man, you missed out on a lot of money because that some of the stuff that is played and some of the drum parts." What Otis said, no one knows his last name. Randy doesn't remember his name because he knew him also. Is I'll play for free. Just give me access to my tracks so I have the recording, since you're paying for the recording, but I want to phase shift the drums until they're simple. Jack DeJohnette had just done it. I said, fine with me, because it was trippy. And that was what made it so different. And it's gone around the world. And I tried to get in touch with him for 50 years. Maybe he's not even alive anymore, but I never got royalties, so I can't really pay him royalties for it. But I would do it anyway, just if I ever was able to track him down. But yeah, the abrupt change, and that was one of the things. I mean, I used to do like everybody else, start mellow, keep it going, and maybe get a little more interesting, then mellow out at the end. And I did that until somewhere around 1999 or so, when Mr. Borders, when we submit our new album, says, "I'm not buying your new album." I said, "Why not? It's great." He says, "Yeah, it's great music, but you have the wrong songs at the beginning." I said, "What do you mean?" "That's how I intended it, to start, mellow and build up and then crescendo." For the listening station, people need the first three songs. If you don't hook them in the first three songs, I'm not going to buy it. And I remember saying, and I have this because it's a quote, it's in my book too. "So you're telling me how I need to sequence my album?" And he says, "Well, I wouldn't put it just like that. But if you don't do it the way I want, I'm not going to buy your album. And then you won't be able to sell in Borders." So guess what I did? I changed the sequence. And I've done that ever since. I mean, there were some battles you could win and some you can't. And
Cool.
but yes, the flow is totally important. And a lot of the albums, in fact, when I would consult at spas, certainly locally up at Sonoma Mission Inn and other ones, that said, "Your music is some of the only ones that we could play because your whole album flows." Other albums, they have lots of good songs, but then they have this crappy song and this dissonant song right in the middle of a side. And, that was before you could, do tracks. So they said, "So we can't play the other people, but we play you." So that was great.
Cool.
So you're
Well,
right.
excellent. Well, thank you for your presentation and the millions of years of work you've done.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Take care now.
Yeah.
Namaste.